Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, and I appreciate that you've come back. I guess I'll just wait a few moments.
In terms of housekeeping, Fiona, is it useful for us to have our cameras and our audio on, or one on and the other muted? How do you want to run this?
I think if you don't mind keeping everything on, it's a nice feeling of being together.
Oh, Emma indicated before also she is prefers to have
camera shy.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me keeping
fantastically helpful.
Are you all in different countries at the moment, or are people nearby the Borrowed Time site? Or
I'm near the Borrowed Times place. I'm in Exmouth in Devon, UK.
Okay, great.
I'm over in Glasgow.
Okay.
Nottingham. Sorry.
Yeah.
Bentley, where are you?
Manchester.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thanks.
And I'm in the UK in Hampshire.
Okay. I was really sorry not to get to come to the site. Actually, it seemed like such a beautiful place to visit.
It is, yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe I'll go ahead and start. Do you think, Tony, as the steward?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should try and make it work.
Yeah.
From now.
Okay. Maybe we've done a little round of introductions of where everybody is, but perhaps we could do a quick round of just everybody to say hello and say their name and maybe what they've been doing this morning. I'm sure most of you have been at some talks already. So my name is Fiona Hallinen, and I'm an artist and researcher, and I'm based in Brussels at the moment. It's a holiday here actually, so I've been dropping my son at a holiday camp this morning, and I haven't gotten to see anything yet.
Okay, I'm Tony Lopez. I'm a poet and retired professor of poetry. I was at the University of Plymouth. I haven't done anything else today. I've been after I made my breakfast, I've been looking at this screen, hoping to get started with you.
Great.
With you all.
Sophie, creative researcher based in Glasgow. So I this morning has just been the keynote. Took the dog out to the yard. She's delighted that I have not gone away.
So I'm Emma. I'm a visual artist. I watched one of the films on the expo thing here this morning, actually, because there weren't any talks previously, which was by Lars Schmidt called Just Having Tea, which was very nice. And I also sat under the tree in my garden in the sunshine having a cup of coffee, which was also very nice.
Sounds good.
Bentley?
I am a creative facilitator based in Manchester. It's very grey and rainy and windy in Manchester today, so I have not been outside yet.
And I'm a social scientist at Nottingham. Got out of walking the dog, but I had to clean the kitchen, so not had a very scenic morning. But yeah, and then since then, just been kind of staring at this screen, as Tony put it.
Great. Okay, thank you all so much. So as you know from the title of the workshop, what I'm going to lead you through today is a process of how to make soap, which is something that I work with as part of my practice. And I also want to sort of put it forward as one of a set of tools for working through endings or things that are dying out. So I've started making soap a few years ago as a way to kind of create these objects that would be almost non-monumental commemorative objects. So things that you wear away as you use them or as you reflect on things that have ended. So that practice and my work, a lot of it is framed through an ongoing collaborative project I have called the Department of Ultimology, alongside a curator called Kate Strain. So ultimology, as we use the term, is the study of endings. So the practice of looking closely at endings or paying attention to the ultimate or the end of the line. And we came across this term originally being used by a linguist and writer called Ross Perlin, who set up an organization in New York called the Endangered Language Alliance. And Ross proposed ultimology as this kind of umbrella term for the study of things that are ending. So in his particular context, that's the study of languages that are dying out. And so in this kind of practice, I try to find ways to make space for people to reflect on or grieve or negotiate or consider things that are ending in the present, things that are at risk right now, passing into disuse, becoming extinct or obsolete. And one of the reasons that I like to make soap, as I mentioned, is this way to kind of mark or work through endings in a non-monumental way. So in 2019, I worked with soap for an installation in a art organization in Dublin. And at the time, I was reading a lot about how it was actually this time of year, there were kind of government organizations cracking down on people having unregulated bonfires around Dublin housing estates. And they were sending out drones to monitor where young people were stockpiling material for these bonfires. So they really wanted to kind of drive out this practice of illegal fires at Halloween, which would be a very old tradition in Ireland, going back to kind of pre-Christian times. So I felt that this kind of tradition of the bonfire as something organized by children and outside of the law was at risk. So I organized a kind of a project with the sound designer where we went out gathering sounds from the bonfires on this one night and also collecting debris or charcoal or ash from the bonfires. And we came back and made hand soap for an exhibition where people were invited to wash their hands using the ash soap from the fires while also listening to the sound of them. So it was this kind of ritual to reflect on something that was dying out. And so the process of making soap is one that's really interesting and that I wanted to share with you all. And I was hoping to do it in real time, but because some of the materials that you need are quite specialized, I wasn't able to translate it directly to the workshop, but I'm going to talk you through it now and share it with you. And then hopefully this is a very simple iteration of the method. You can go forward and do it yourselves.
Yeah.
Has anyone actually made soap before?
No.
No. Oh, Sophie, you have. Great. Okay. You're probably more technically experienced than I am, because
it was very crude. It was like a passion project of a friend in her kitchen, and as we're dealing with the lie, she was like, "If you ever need to dispose of a body, Sophie."
Exactly. Yes. So actually, the lie, that's the product that really makes this, I think, something that you have to be a little bit careful with. So the process of saponification, it's basically that you take lye, which is sodium hydroxide, it's caustic, and you mix that with fats. In this case, I'm using olive oil and coconut oil. And the lye has a reaction then with the fats that turns it into soap as we know it, like in lather. So soap is a substance I think is really interesting because it wears away as we use it, but as it does so, it kind of clings to us and becomes us and mixes with us and transfers to us and transforms us. And as it wears away, it doesn't always do it in a kind of predictable way. So sometimes big chunks come off it, and sometimes a small little sliver will be stuck in your shower for an incredibly long amount of time. So its ending is not always distinct. And I think it has this kind of transformative potential that changes what it's used upon, but it's also the result of a change. So to begin, what I'm going to ask you to do while I kind of work through the process, I'm going to turn the camera down so you can see what I'm doing. And the first process is just mixing the lye that we mentioned, this sodium hydroxide, which is used as a
Drain cleaner.
Yeah, it's drain cleaner basically. So you can buy this in a pharmacy as drain cleaner, but you just have to check the ingredients to make sure that it doesn't have anything else in it, because sometimes drain cleaner might come with fragrance or something like that.
So is it also called soda, washing soda?
No.
Is it the same stuff?
No,
it's caustic soda.
It's sodium hydroxide.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can see on this one, the composition just
Okay.
as sodium hydroxide. Okay, so I'm going to turn the camera down now so that you can see what I'm at. And you can drift in or out as you wish. Okay, so the first thing that we do is we mix the lye with water, and this process is the kind of most dangerous one because it creates a lot of heat and it gives off some fumes. So you always have to make sure that your windows are open when you do that. So I've got here, I've measured out the water already. So for this recipe, it's a lot of the recipes you find online are in American measurements in ounces, and so I transferred everything to milliliters and grams. That's something that's ultimological in the UK, possibly, is the metric system. I've heard, was Boris Johnson thinking about bringing back ounces?
Well, some of us sort of never made the transition perfectly. I suppose it just depends how old you are. You know.
Yeah,
but we still, some people still think of the imperial measurements, and only partly, you know. So we still speak of miles here. I don't think most people use kilometers.
We say miles in Ireland as well.
Yeah,
where I'm from.
So we're between. There's lots of dead measurements, but there's sort of parallel several measurements at once, don't you think?
Yeah. It's not quite clear where one begins or ends.
I really like the idea of dead measurements.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Okay, so
perches and rods and furlongs and.
So I've measured the lye. It's 55.75 grams, and then the water I have 145.4 milliliters. And I'm going to put on some goggles here to protect my eyes, and some gloves while I do this, and a mask as well. So while I do it, I would suggest, if you are feeling comfortable to do so, to maybe yourselves to reflect on an ending or something that you recognize as coming to an end in your life in the present, that you can think about now, that you can imagine then possibly transferring or distilling into a soap that you could make. So using some kind of particle or debris or leftover to make a soap that you could bathe in to pass through an ending. And while you do that, I'm going to mix this lye with water. So this is the dangerous part. And actually you'll see I have these spatulas, which this one melted from using lye and water, because it generates a lot of heat when you mix them. So just to be extra safe, then I have some vinegar that I'm going to use to neutralize this. There's still a few little bits left, and I just want to be sure. So when you make soap and when you use lye, you should have vinegar on hand as something to mop up or neutralize any of the lye that's left over. the next thing I'm going to do is mix the fats together. So the lye now will be quite warm, and you just leave that to cool down for about 10 minutes. And in the meantime, I'm going to so for the fat for this, I'm going to use 142 milliliters of coconut oil. So I've melted the coconut oil a little bit in the microwave. Okay. And then 251 milliliters of olive oil. So I'm going to mix those together.
Why do you use two different oils?
So all the oils have different characteristics. I'm not completely familiar with all of them, but I know olive oil will make it slightly softer and creamier, and coconut oil will make it harder. The other oils that people use are sunflower oil, castor oil. I think castor oil is good for lather, but generally none of the recipes that I've looked up use a single oil. They all seem to use separate ones. I think then if you were making a soap for a dish soap, like a washing up liquid type of soap, you would use a different one again. So this would be for a kind of a bath soap or a shower soap. So for now, I'm just going to let the lye water, which I have here in a bowl. I can still feel from the bottom of that it's actually quite hot. So I'm going to let it cool down a little bit. And then once it's cooled, I'll add it to this, the bowl of the oils that I have, and blend them together. So some people, when they're making this, they use a whisk, which can take a really, really long time. But for this, I'm going to use a stick blender like this. Okay. So one of the ways that I've been working on Ultimology that I wanted to speak about is through this process of gathering knowledge around traditions of death and dying. So I was really interested to attend this conference for that reason. So in this process of developing a subject like ultimology as a kind of hypothetical field of study of endings, Kate, my collaborator, and I have basically been, over the last year, gathering knowledge around death and dying in two ways. So the first method has been a reading group that we organize online, where about 10 people usually come, and we will bring a piece of material that we've read together separately, and we'll discuss that collectively and then bring some of our own experiences to it. And separately to that, I've started embroidery workshops in a studio in Ghent, in Belgium, near where I live, where local people are invited to come and sit around a table, and we speak about traditions of death in our immediate environment, and we sew depictions of these into a cloth collectively. So we're working together to make this tablecloth. That's a kind of a collective mapping of knowledge around death and dying. And the embroidery practice came out of a sense that I had that working with our hands was something really helpful in negotiating difficult subjects like endings or like death and dying. So I'm really interested in kind of seeing if hand-based practices can help us to develop methods for ultimology. So methods of things like oral interview techniques and artworks. So one of the kind of recurring practices in these studies of death and dying that I've recorded in different contexts is the importance of active awareness and presence. So, for example, in an embroidery session in Ghent with a woman from Pakistan, we spoke about how, in her experience, after the death of somebody, it was really, really important that speech would be kept ongoing, that silence was always filled. But at the same time, you had to be aware that certain types of conversations were not allowed. So she spoke about how the older generation would sort of correct younger people who slip into inappropriate types of conversation. And they'd also use prompts to kind of make sure the conversation kept going on. And this was something that I sort of saw as a similar idea of the notion of presence and active awareness as how the Irish tradition of the wake treats the idea of presence in the company of the deceased. So the notion of the Irish wake and the term waking the dead just coming from this act of staying awake in the company of the person who's died. So there's one text that we read called Irish Wake Amusements by Sean O'Sullivan, which is a study from 1967, where he talks about the games that we played in the Irish wake tradition. So these were activities that integrated the corpse into the social scene, and they could be sort of bawdy or subversive or sometimes sexualized games conducted in the presence of the person who died soon after the moment of death. And these have been interpreted as negotiating the loss, but also a kind of way of reshaping the social order in the context of the loss of a member of the community. So the reading group's been really fascinating in that we could talk about a text like that, but a lot of people in the group would also have their own familiar experiences of being in an Irish wake. Or even in discussing a text like that, people realised that they had been in the presence of something such as what O'Sullivan describes as creating a situation, and yet they hadn't really realised it at the time. So some of the games that were described would include the subversion of roles, so people acting like animals or taking the place of animals in agricultural activities, or young people or children taking on authoritative roles. So one participant in the reading group described a situation where the body of the person who died would be tied together with a string in such a way that when someone walked into the room, the string could be cut and the body of the person would leap up into a different position. So the idea is that this kind of creating a situation sets a tone in place for the collective in the present moment. So in the reading group and the embroidery circle, we've shared experiences of physical acts in mourning. So a lot of people in the group described the kind of importance of singing or wailing by professionals or by members of the family, bathing, redressing of the person who's died, donation of clothing, the act of digging the grave itself or carrying the body of the dead. So these acts are, I sense, to kind of emphasize the idea of presence and company and awareness in the presence of the person who's died, keeping words ongoing and hands busy. So in ultimology, drawing from what we've observed through listening to people speaking about practices of death and dying, what we suggest is a kind of way of negotiating endings that links to the notion of accompaniment. So the accompaniment of a person who has died or is dying, sitting with endings and looking directly at them. So one of the ways that we seed the notion of ultimology or hope to share it is tentatively suggesting processes like this as an alternative to monumental representations of the past. So we try to facilitate activities that focus on endings in the present, rather than, as it's been described in Gary Young's argument, that we should pull down statues or monuments, rather than petrifying historical discourse. So Gary Young wrote in a recent article in The Guardian about the movement to demonumentalize public space, that when we create statues, by lathering historical discourse in cement, hoisting it high and insisting on it as a permanent statement of fact, culture, truth, and tradition that can never be questioned, touched, removed, or recast. So Jung argues for this movement called the demonumental, the notion that we cannot mark incidents of the past with fixed representations such as statues. He writes, statue obsession mistakes adulation for history, history for heritage, and heritage for memory. It attempts to detach the past from the present from morality, and morality from responsibility. In short, it attempts to set our understanding of what has happened in stone, beyond interpretation, investigation, or critique. So he suggests that when we create these certain narratives as set in stone, we leave multiple other perspectives unseen. And we link this idea, this notion of the imposition of a singular narrative at the cost of everything else, at its most extreme, to something that we see in colonial and missionary ideologies. So Deborah Bird-Rose, the researcher, has written about her research with Aboriginal people, and she describes an account of how white Australian settlers disrupted a sense of time in the communities they colonised, bringing with them an idea of future-oriented, singular progress. So she wrote, they looked straight ahead to the future, a singular path of optimism and salvation informing their dreams and deeds. This future is a characteristic feature of commitments to modernity, that complex of symbolic and material projects for separating nature and culture. Moving towards this future requires ruthless ambition and the willingness to participate in great projects of destruction while ignoring extinction as collateral damage. So we propose Ultimology as an active attempt to grapple with this narrative of progress through turning attention to that which is ending in the present, or vulnerable to what Bird-Rose describes as collateral damage. Rosie Braidotti, in her essay, Non-Fascist Ethics, Learning to Live and Die as Affirmation, describes the present moment as being between the fourth industrial revolution and the sixth mass extinction. She puts it that we're learning to live with multiple worlds that are dying, not all of them human. So as I mentioned, we first heard the term Ultimology being used by Ross Perlin in the context of endangered languages. And then when we went on to work on this project, we brought it into the context of the university. So we proposed that Ultimology could become a real active tool for investigating what was endangered, obsolete, or pushed to the peripheries of the campus in a learning environment. And what we suggested was to do this through a series of interviews with individuals working across disciplines in the university. So together with Kate, I went to the university asking individuals if they'd speak to us, introducing Ultimology to them in a somewhat nebulous way, and asking them, what do you see as ending before you? What is dead or dying? So in the interviews, we invited participants to articulate endings that they were seeing in their real life on their desk in front of them and in their present experience. Out of this, then we went on to develop performances, collaborations, events and talks, and we published a radio essay for RTE Drama on One 2 years ago, the national radio broadcaster in Ireland. So what we're proposing is that we're immersed in multiple endings, not only those of species, plants, animals, insects, languages, crafts, ways of living, but we're present to what Deborah Bird-Rose has described as double deaths, those extinctions that set off many more. She's written, there are the functional extinctions, the extinction cascades, the extinction vortexes. These are ways in which we, as things start to slip down that death road, other things start going too. Relationships unravel, mutualities falter, dependence becomes a peril rather than a blessing, and whole worlds of knowledge and practice diminish. So I think that the lye and water should be cooled down enough now to mix them together. So I'm going to turn the screen around again so that you can see what I'm doing here. So this is the mixture of fats that we made earlier, and I'm going to add in the lye and water. So as you do this, you start to whisk it a little bit. And now I'm going to take this blender and start to mix it a little bit more seriously. So as I do so, what we're looking for is what they call in soap making a trace, which means that when this starts to blend and emulsify and thicken, when I lift it up from the liquid, we'll see the trace of the material on top of it. So I'll show you what I mean when I do it. I'm going to do a little bit more. I just remembered to put my goggles back on because this part can still be splattery. Okay, I'm going to keep blending it a little bit longer. I think it's going to take a little bit more time, but fortunately, I do have one that I made earlier. So I'm going to pop that over there. And this is the one that I made earlier. So it's just been poured into a mold. What I did when it got to the trace stage was I put in a little bit of essential oil. So in this case, I have ylang-ylang. But I'm interested to hear what, if any of you have thought of something that you would try or experiment with. Did anyone have a suggestion for some particle or object that you would use to mark an ending in making a soap?
Well, I think it would be nice to get some basil and have a sense of the summer. I mean, you can easily buy pesto in a jar, I suppose, but you know, the things that are bright and fresh and wonderful in the summer, you know, when you get them in the winter, they don't have any, like tomatoes don't have any flavour. And, you know, the basil plants all die. So I'd quite like to have some soap that had those scents and strong flavours. Anyone else?
I think sometimes there's also just the when I went and made soap with my friend in her kitchen. She'd had this very romantic idea of putting flower petals in, but there was this what I thought was kind of sort of interesting transformation where there were these rose petals, and I think maybe just because they'd maybe not dried properly, as the soap dried, these petals became kind of gross. So they started to weather from, there were still these sort of beautiful, like the red became kind of oxblood, but there were also these sort of elements of like rust and agedness in it, which made the soap interesting to handle as well.
Yeah. So Fiona,
Yes.
you were saying that you did a project where you gathered up ashes and put them into soap.
Yes.
So that would give the soap a strange texture, wouldn't it, if you were using it?
Yeah, and because it was from these bonfires, it was not entirely consistent ash either.
Sure.
I'm not sure that it's something that you'd want to use in the shower in the morning to kind of feel your cleanest for the day. But it was more like a kind of a ritual of looking closely at this tradition that I felt like was at risk.
Yeah.
But similarly, one thing that when I first started making soap, actually, it was when I was moving house after living somewhere for a few years. And I was, as you always do when you're moving house, I think you find all these enormous piles of dust under beds and places that have never been moved. So I started to make these little dust soaps to mark the move from a house. So that's what I've got here today. I was going to make a little one. This is actually some dust from my last house move. So I thought I'd make a little.
It's a dust bunny.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is just put it into the mold that I have here. I think this might still need to be blended a little bit more. And I don't want to put you through it. So I would just imagine, I suppose, that I would just basically pour that on top of the mold. And then like this one that I have here, this is pretty much hardened now. Oh no, I can see when I push it, actually, there's a little crack. But what you would do normally, you put it into your mold, and your mold can be something like this. This is specifically for soap, but you could also use a loaf tin lined with parchment paper, and then you can slice the soap to make bars of it.
Yeah.
Or I tried also, just as an experiment, making this plate one, which I thought that I might slice up into little pizza slices of soap. Again, I can see that that's too soft still to take out of the mold. But what you can do is, once you've poured it in, leave it overnight. And then the following day, you take it out of the mold and you leave it to cure then for a number of days. I think the more time, the better, that it kind of it gets a little bit harder and a bit more integrity. At that stage, then after you've cured it, it's ready to use or to give away as a gift to people. But I'm wearing my glasses. So I really wanted to kind of suggest this as a possible process for marking some ending that you might have or be negotiating or suggest as a ritual. So soap as this kind of potential hypothetical set of tools for this hypothetical subject of ultimology. So there's a quote that I read recently by Achille Mbembe in an article that he wrote about the pandemic, called The Universal Right to Breathe. And he wrote, "Try as we might to rid ourselves of it, in the end, everything brings us back to the body. We tried to graft it onto other media, to turn it into an object body, a machine body, a digital body, an ontophonic body. It returns to us now as a horrifying giant mandible, a vehicle for contamination, a vector for pollen, spores, and mold." So in a way, what I hope with soap is this way to kind of return us to our body, even for the 20 seconds it takes us to wash our hands, which is something that, as we all know, has become an extremely charged and important action these days. So yes, it's a set of tools that I hope that you might be able to use and return to yourselves.
I'm struck in you saying that about the fact that actually the thing that we embed in the soap comes out again once the soap has gone. So you are left with with the sort of the thing that was being embedded somehow comes back.
Yeah, it's true. It doesn't deteriorate as the soap does. It's kind of just a way to stay with it a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, Tony, I meant to say that I love the idea of basil, but one thing you're not supposed to do is use fresh plants in soap.
Right. Yeah. So you'd have to have an oil.
Yes, exactly.
Because you were using an oil, essential oil.
Yeah. So essential oils and dried things, so spices.
Right.
Different spices that you can use, and different spices can color it as well. You know, turmeric would make it yellow, or paprika can make it red. Dried beetroot powder can do a pink color.
Yeah.
But yeah, the workshop is not the most technical. This is the most basic, and hopefully just a starting point for you to feel like it's something that you can do yourself.
What was the other oil, Fiona?
Olive oil.
Olive oil and
coconut oil.
And coconut, mixture of the two.
Yes.
And
so I did.
So how do you choose which oil to use?
Well, I wanted just the most easily available, really.
Right.
But then I read that they have these different qualities. So coconut oil, I know, makes it harder. It'll make it harden faster.
Okay, so if you make it with a fat that is normally solid at room temperature, does that make it a different quality soap? So you know, you've mixed a fat which is normally hard, relatively hard, coconut, not really hard, with a soft one, because olive oil is usually liquid at room temperature.
Yeah, I intuitively
thought. Supposing you used, I don't know, pork fat, or would different oils make different qualities?
The olive oil or coconut oil, sorry, it melts around 30 degrees, I think.
Right.
Like, you know, if you're ever in a hot country, coconut oil is not solid.
Completely liquid.
I think that the hardness or softness is actually that's changed fundamentally by the saponification, what the lye does to it.
Okay. So have you tried using different sorts of oils and fats?
I've only used coconut and olive oil.
Right, okay.
You can experiment. Yeah. So this is kind of the most basic at home with the ingredients that you might have in your pantry already.
I suppose it's making me think of Joseph Beuys's work with fat and felt.
Okay.
And, you know, it's reminding me, you know, the notion of memorializing with things which are themselves still biological and, able to change.
Well, or there's Janine Antony's portrait series, Lick and Lather, where she creates portraits of her face with soap and then bathes them.
I didn't know that. Can you say the name again?
Yes, Janine Antony.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things that she's kind of most known for is there's a series called Lick and Lather, and where she's created these portraits of her head in soap, and she bathes with them, and in chocolate, where she licks them. So she's done some interesting things with soap that I would think of. Something I was thinking about, just because you're close to Kent, and that's where your embroidery course or workshop is. Have you gone to the Dr. Ghislain Museum?
No.
You might enjoy where so it's there's this exhibition, and it still haunts me, from years ago, which was called Wahnsinn ist vrouwelijk loosely translate to madness is feminine. But they displayed craft projects that women who'd been institutionalized had worked on. And there was this one piece that I think about all the time that was just this jacket this woman had made, and she'd embroidered her life story across it, and it kills you. Just it completely shatters you, but you probably have access to that.
Yeah, that's great.
Just give you a picture of it.
Yes, thank you so much. I'll go and see that.
Yeah.
One of the fat projects that I remember of Joseph Beuys was that he molded a horrible, ugly underpass, a concrete underpass, which was a dangerous place for citizens, for women especially, and also an ugly place, and just horrible. And he molded it in fat, and then it was cut apart so that it could come apart, and then he donated it to the castle, the famous castle biennial exhibition. So it's in the museum in Germany now, being kept at a certain temperature so that it won't melt away. And it's a memorial of this ugly underpass, and a kind of political response to brutalism. And it seems to me very relevant with what we're talking about. And when I saw you pour, the soap into the mold, it reminded me of this work, which it's because it's made of trash. It has a kind of power. It's a kind of anti-memorial. It's a very interesting area to explore. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thank you for the references that you've shared. So, what was the work called by Joseph Beuys?
I'm sorry, but I'd have to.
I can find
to go to. If you get a big book of Joseph Beuys, you'll find lots and lots of projects made of fat, because he mostly worked in fat and felt. He didn't tend to make things that were, permanent in that sense. So they have to be preserved actively.
Yeah.
But so you'll find this molded underpass. It's a very moving piece of work.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, and thank you all for accommodating the time problem. I appreciate it.
We love it. It's great. Thanks for your workshop. It's terrific.
Thank you, and hopefully I will see some of you again at some other workshops or talks now.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, we're done.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sophie.